Hi and welcome to Let's Talk. Thank you for joining me tonight. This will be Face to Face with Jesus, Chapter 5. Let's begin. Chapter 5. Famine. As the war dragged on and the battles between factions increased and became more violent, these things we had taken for granted became scarce. Gas and electricity were even more frequently turned off. At first, we foraged for firewood from the trees and shrubs. Then, desperate, we burned dry cow dung. Fuel was soon gone as everyone in the great city struggled to stay warm. We began to break up and burn wood furniture in our house. A treasured blanket chest that was a family heirloom, our chairs and beds. Piece by piece, the frigid hand of war shattered all that was comfortable and ordinary in our lives. No longer were the streets and sidewalks cleared. Heaps of dirty snow concealed frozen bodies, and old and young alike. My father and brothers did the best they could to keep us fed as the violence of the war escalated around us. They brought us potatoes, beans, and sometimes apples. Packs of wild dogs, hungry and dangerous, roamed the streets at night. I guess that sometimes the dogs became meat for our stew pot. We did not ask where the food came from when Papa or one of my brothers brought home a chunk of meat. I didn't allow myself to think of what I was eating or anticipate what the evening meal might be made of. I haunched of a horse, a wild goat or a dog, an unlucky pigeon. We were merely happy to have food. Since there was no fireplace in our apartment, Papa burned the wood outdoors, then scooped up the coals and carried them upstairs. The embers were placed in a metal bowl, normally used for cooking. Then the bowl was placed under a low table in the sitting room. Papa put a large blanket over the table to capture the warmth. Every member of our family slept around the table with the blanket covering us to ward off frostbite. Our desperate task. It was just past noon on a snowy day in January, when almost all the furniture in the apartment was gone. Papa gathered us together, preparing us for a desperate task. We must have fuel to keep us warm, my children. He gestured at the remnants of a broken chair. There is nothing left in the house to burn. We must find fuel today or we will not survive. We have a few hours of daylight. There is fighting across town, but it is quiet today in our neighborhood. We will go out 2 by 2 to look for firewood, a broken branch, a plank. If you see anything that will burn, bring it home. Mama added, you must return before sunset. You must be indoors before the dog packs are out hunting. What if the soldiers come? Adelia asked. Papa put his big hand on our shoulders. If you hear gunfire or a helicopter or a tank approaching, hurry home. Take no chances. You must return to the apartment at the first hint of danger. We all knew that snipers could be hiding anywhere. Our hope was that they would not set their sights on children or use us as target practice. Mama's face was pale with worry. We dressed in our warmest clothes, then we wept and clung to one another, not knowing who would make it safely back home. Adelia and I were the last two to go, dragging a sled as if we intended to play. We set out into the snowbound streets in search of firewood. Being the youngest, we were instructed that we must always keep the windows of our apartment building in view. Where will we find wood? I scanned the street and looked up at the frosty windows of our apartment. It seemed an almost hopeless task. My sister frowned at a frozen mound. Papa says anything will help. Look there. She pointed at the base of the snow. Is that anything? Sticking out from the heap was dirty snow with the end of a single scrap of wood. We began to dig out the frozen heap with our hands in an attempt to pry it loose. Behind me, I heard the familiar voice of my friend Gamila. "Miriam, Adelia," she called as she ran towards us. When she reached us, I noticed that her eyes was red, as though she had been crying. She looked very thin, and her cheeks were chapped with cold. "I saw you from the window." Out of breath, she now stood beside us. "We're trying to get wood," Adelia explained. "We broke up our chairs," Gamelia said. "There is only a little left. My father says we will freeze to death." She paused. I heard him talking to Mama about Mr. Sharik. Did you hear about him? Mr. Sharik, meaning compassionate, was a Shia Muslim who taught my favorite subject in school, math. He was a patient and kind man filled with compassion for students who struggled with the concept of mathematics. He was also a principal's assistant, the vice president of the school. We were Sunni Muslims, and though there was an enormous conflict between our denominations and the Shia Muslims, my family continued to be at peace with people of all beliefs. I straightened and searched her face. I had not seen him since they closed the school. "He is a Shia," Papa says, "so it's very unsafe for him on our side of the neighborhood." Gamila nodded sadly. "He's dead?" Adelia gasped. "Dead? Not Mr. Shurik?" I cried. "He can't be dead. No!" My thoughts turned to this kindergarten math teacher. At that instant, the sound of a helicopter chopped at the air. We dashed towards the entrance of our building and rushed inside. "Tell us what happened. Are you sure he's dead, Gamelia?" Gamelia spilled the details. "They came for him, the militia. I don't know if it was Sunni or Shia. Does it matter anymore? They are all animals. They beat him in front of his wife and children, dragged him away. He was missing for days, and then someone said his body washed up on the bank of the river." She choked out the final details. "He was barefoot." Adelia began to cry. "Oh no," I sobbed. Gamelia bit her lip. "No one knows. They are all killing each other, and no one remembers why or what the war is about. But the facts are they tortured him, and he's dead, all right?" Weeping, the three girls climbed the stairs to our apartment. I was no longer hungry. I didn't feel cold. I was numb. I grieved deeply for Mr. Shurik, who had been like a kind uncle to me. He was an inspirational teacher and made me love mathematics. Now, however, when I thought of this subject, a sick feeling came to my stomach. As I imagined my teacher's lifeless form floating in water, the light gone from his eyes, blood drained from his body, I would have nightmares as I tried to sleep at night. But the sound of bombs and bullets ensured my sleep was never deep, and I often awakened with a start at the noise of an explosion nearby. Through racking sobs, we told my mother the news about Mr. Shurik. What would become of his wife and children? But we knew that we could not help. In this civil war, they were Shia and we were Sunni. Suddenly, the gulf between us was a valley of death. One by one, my brothers and my sisters returned with their arms heaped with scrap wood. There were tears of relief from us in their return. Mama told Papa about Mr. Sherrick and that she no longer wanted us girls to go out on the street. Papa put his hands on my shoulders. I know you are very sad, Mariam. There is nothing to be done. Nothing at all. Senseless, brutal violence. Papa then straightened up. He gave Mama a directive. We must all dress in the drabbiest clothes we own. The girls must cover themselves completely from now on. No one is safe. Mama nodded. All right then. Yes, I agree. From now on, no color on our clothing to draw attention or even a stitch of embroidery outside this apartment. That night, Papa brought coals up and put them in the metal bowl. We covered ourselves with the blanket draped over the table and all lay like the spokes of a wheel, our heads pointed toward the warmth. Papa whispered to Mama, I do not know how to keep my daughters safe from such madness. There is no law in our country, only hunger, cold, and vengeance. Mr. Sherrick's murder was my introduction to death as a child. Very soon I was to see and hear much worse. My innocence and childhood would irrevocably be stolen. Life was now about survival, and we had to fight for it. Rumors of food. I'll take a drink. Food became increasingly scarce. In my prayers to Allah, I asked again and again for us to be fed and warm. Allah did not answer my prayers. Shia Muslims continued to kill Sunni Muslims and vice versa. Radicals cried for death and of democracy and the return to Sharia law. I continued to ask Allah for help, but no help came. When we heard rumors of food, others heard those rumors too, creating long lines and presenting snipers with opportunities to strike. There was only one place in the city where bread was baked and distributed by the government. The official ration was 1 loaf of bread per person. Thousands flocked to the gates to wait for the bread lines for hours to receive ration. Mama and 2 of my sisters were ill and would not survive the journey and the cold. It was up to the rest of us to bring home enough to share. Before dawn, despite the danger and the freezing cold, we made our tearful farewells and trudged with Papa toward the bread factory. Snow crunched beneath our feet like the sound of gunshots. Adelia's breath rose in like cold puffs of steam. I am so cold, Mariam. Her teeth chattered as we took our places at the back of the serpentine line, swelled with thousands of starving citizens. Pretend you're someplace warm. I clung to her. Pretend we're on a tropical warm island where there is always summer and sunshine. I laughed and we jumped up and down to keep our feet from freezing. Slowly, the dawn broke and the line crept forward. Soldiers with automatic weapons patrolled the lines to keep order. We leaned against one another to rest. Mid-morning, we inched past the frozen bodies of the elderly couple who had not survived the night. They sat down to rest, said a young woman behind us as we stared at them. You can't sit down, you can't sleep, this is what happens. My father called to a soldier. You should take these bodies away. The soldier shrugged. They aren't hurting anyone. Papa stood between us and our view of the dead. He tried to keep our thoughts occupied with memories of warm summer days on our grandparents' farm in the country. What was your favorite part of the summer? He asked. I considered my answer carefully. Warm sun on my back beside the lake, riding horses, helping gather eggs from the hens. Adelia blurted, breakfast and lunch and dinner. We laughed. But the truth was that the present hunger gnawing at our stomachs had made every happy memory center around food. Ahead of us, a young woman with a baby in her arms started to wail, my baby, someone help me, oh please, please. Others gathered around her. Her screams grew louder. An officer shouldered through. Moments passed and the word came back to us. The baby is dead. Froze to death. It was sick anyway. Armed men in heavy coats led the weeping mother away. Why did she bring it out in the cold? Poor woman. But why would she bring a sick child to the breadline? Adelia and I exchanged glances. We knew why. The choice was freezing to death or dying at home of starvation. The sun set, and it grew very dark. A frigid wind blew down from the mountains. Snow flurries stung our cheeks. Would we ever reach the front of the gates of the factory? Those who were too weak to carry on sat on the heaps of snow. Some died right there. Adelia whispered hoarsely, we can't sit down, we can't sleep until we get a ration and get home to Mama. I nodded and I closed my eyes against the cold. The crowd became restless as the rumor spread there would be not enough for us. What was taking so long, someone complained loudly. Can't they see we are freezing to death? They've run out of bread, wailed another. They have no more bread to give us, a man shouted. Others joined in the clamor. Suddenly the shouts became demanding. Violence broke out into the starving mob. Pushed up at the gate, soldiers fired into the air, but the panic increased. Papa tried to shield us as the pushing became a crush. Stay close to me. Bullets whizzed past my head. Adelia ordered, hold on to my hand, don't let go. Blood sprayed snow as someone next to me was hit. Then two more fell as stray bullets crashed into them. Terrified shrieks increased until I could hardly hear my father's voice. Suddenly, Adelia let go of my hand. Mariam, stay with Papa. I'm going, she cried above the din. D-I-N. Going where? I've got to go try to get us some bread. You can't, they'll kill you. We will die here if I don't go. I love you. Please, Adelia, don't. I will come back. The shoving and the violence all around me, tore me from my sister. Papa braced himself, protecting me from being crushed to death. Where's Adelia? She's gone. She said she would try to get bread. I heard Papa call her name, but it was too late. We were caught up in the swarming mob as bullets tore through the crowd. A woman beside me was killed by gunfire. A gunfire burst. I was knocked to the ground beside her. Papa, through superhuman strength, kept me from being trampled and crushed to death. The riot ended. Too many had died. The soldiers demanded that we must all disappear or be shot. Over 20 hours of waiting, and we had nothing to show for it. Papa held me tightly as we picked our way out of the chaos. Mariam, we must find your sister. I sobbed. Adelia, where are you, Adelia? Papa and I stood panting in the dark, shouting Adelia's name. A soldier shoved Papa with the butt of his gun. Get out of here. Everyone must go now. But my daughter, I must find my 12-year-old daughter. In that instant, Adelia was at my elbow. Here I am, Papa. Her eyes were wide. Come, hurry, we must go. Papa wept with relief. Where did you go? If something had happened, your mother would not have forgiven me, Adelia. Where did you go?" She did not answer. The soldier turned away, plucking at Papa's sleeve. Adelia led us some distance from the crowd. She paused before swinging a bag out from under her coat. "It's still warm," she whispered. "What?" Papa gasped. "Yes, still warm. Hurry, Papa. There will be enough to share." We wound our way through the dark streets toward home. The burlap bag filled with 36 loaves of bread was worth more than sacks of gold. We could hardly breathe as we hurried past the knots of people talking about the bread riots and the many who had died that night. We did not dare speak until we entered our apartment and slumped onto the floor. Through the courage of my sister, we had enough to share with our neighbors and the rations that lasted us almost a week. Adelia's courage. Once we were home, Adelia told us her story. She had fearlessly dashed toward the high fence that protected the factory from the outside. As the riots continued at her back, she scaled the wire, throwing herself over the top. Then she raced wildly toward the second fence as the clatter of bullets seemed to pursue her. Without a moment's hesitation, she clambered over the second fence, cutting herself on concertina wire at the top. She expected the searing pain of a bullet in her back, but the scent of baking bread drove her on. Flashes of gunfire illuminated the night as the guards and soldiers flocked to defend against the starving mob outside. Inside the usually closed guarded grounds, there were no soldiers in sight. They were all in defensive grounds. There were no soldiers in sight. They were all in defensive positions at the gates. Adelia sneaked close to the building. The scent of fresh bread beckoned her toward the window. There was a fraction of an inch opening, and she managed to pry it wider apart. Suddenly, she was in the bakery. Warm ovens heated the air, heaps of warm bread piled on the racks. She searched for something to carry the bounty away. A single burlap bag lay crumpled on the floor. Adelia opened it and scooped loaves into the sack. 1 dozen, then 2 dozen, another dozen loaves. She scanned the floor, praying for another bag, but did not find one. The next minute, the harsh voices of soldiers and the bakery workers sounded at the front of the building. They were returning to their post. Adelia ducked down and, dragging the sack of bread behind her, hurried to the open window. With effort, she slung her bounty onto the snowy ground, then scrambled out after it. Closing the window, she hefted the sack and began her journey back to us. Adelia, that was the only beginning. She grew more courageous as the Civil War continued. She now knew how and where to get bread without telling anyone but me. She risked her life for us all. 2 weeks later, a tank surrounded by a small squad of soldiers clanked past below our windows. Adelia watched it go. As soon as it turned the corner at the end of the block, she said, "I'm going now." "Wait, I'm coming too," I said, even though I was small for my age and weak from lack of food. Adelia shook her head. "Absolutely not. You'd only slow me down." Holding my hands in both of hers, she bent to look me in the eye. We both knew the risk she was taking. If she was caught alone, she would be raped and then killed. Since she would be approaching from the rear of the plant, she would have to scale the fence to enter the grounds after dashing down narrow streets and hiding whenever anyone else appeared. From our window, I watched her emerge from our building, hiding briefly beside an abandoned car. Then she darted across the street into the alley and out of sight. When Adelia had been away for an hour, it already seemed like days. I was concerned. How long could it take? Adelia was a fast runner and confident. What was taking her so long? She finally reemerged from the alley with a big bag full of loaves of bread, pausing to look around carefully before coming out of the safety of the alley. I saw her glance up at our window, nodding toward me even though she could not see me. She raised the sack proudly. "Look what I found," the gesture said. She was at the entry to the alley where the brick walls of the building opposite of ours formed a corner. A bullet struck just above Adelia's head, showering her hair with dark red dust. The sound of the sniper firing came a second later, but Adelia was already racing across the street. When the second shot came, slamming into the wall of our building, she was already back inside the doorway and safe. Once in our home, I hugged her and cried that she had almost been killed. There were torn places in her sweater from climbing over a chain-link fence and squeezing through a narrow passage. "Don't you ever do that again," I urged. Adelia shrugged. "We have to eat." We both knew that before the war ended, that there would be many more times when great courage and cunning would be required. During that time, we learned to live on our knees. I was no longer safe to stand up in our apartment. We crawled from room to room below the level of the windows, lest we be targeted and shot. One afternoon, a burst of shooting erupted outside our apartment. Adelia warned snipers in the building across the street, but Mama remained frozen in terror, and an infrared sniper laser targeted her heart. "Mama, move!" I yelled. The instant she dropped to her knees, the sniper pulled the trigger and the bullet buzzed past her head. My sisters and I crawled to where she lay on the floor. I could see the bullet hole in the wall where she had been standing. A fraction of a second later, and she would have died. I wept and held her close, praying for the nightmare to end. But the fighting only grew worse. It was as if we were living in a nightmare, a horror movie that did not end. The whir of the helicopter and the drone of the plane sent us scrambling for cover in the basement as bombs began to fall. Why were Muslims killing Muslims? Where was Allah when we prayed to Him? Worth the risk. Give me another drink. Winter crept in, and we were firmly locked into the second year of war. Adelia and I heard that the bakery might be getting a fresh supply of bread. "We should go," Adelia said firmly. "We should try to get a ration." This afternoon, we decided it was worth the risk to our safety. Bundled up with coats and hats, we hurried along the deserted streets in biting cold and gathered with hundreds of others to wait for the shop to open. The streets were blanketed with snow. We stamped our feet in an attempt to stay warm as we waited in line. Darkness fell. We could not leave our place in line, so we crouched together in the snow and attempted to sleep. Tucking our faces close to one another, we prayed that morning would come soon. An elderly man and 2 elderly women froze to death through that long night. Adelia and I were both blue with cold. I could not feel my hands or my feet as dawn crept over the tops of the buildings. Snow glistened in the soft morning light. Voices stirred the morning air as crowds of new arrivals flooded the street. They had not been waiting in line as we had. They knew they would not get any bread because they had come too late. In desperation, the crowd swelled and surged forward toward the bakery. Men and women climbed over those who had been waiting in the snow. I was caught unaware by a boot crashing onto my head. I screamed in shock, "Help!" I tried to scramble up out of the danger. Somehow Adelia and I were separated, and I was trapped between two large people. My cheek was crushed against someone's back. My breath was being squeezed out of me. I felt consciousness slipping away. Just as that moment, the police arrived and fired their guns in the air, causing the mob to retreat. The bodies crushing me released just enough for me to draw a breath of air and escape from the press. Even though I was no longer being crushed, the police were now firing at the people. Many of those who had been waiting all night for the bread were killed, trampled badly, and badly injured. I was terrified. Bullets sprayed the air, missing me by fractions. I had been crying to Allah and Muhammad, praying my set of Arabic prayers, but there was no answer. Losing all hope, in my own language, I knew He was the God of Christians and Jews, and I wondered if He would somehow be able to help me. Creator God, if you exist and if you are real, please help me, I cried, knowing it would be a miracle if I survived. Suddenly, a supernatural calm and relief descended upon me, as if an angel pulled me out of the chaos. An instant later, my sister Adelia was in front of me. Her arms were full of bread. "Quick, let's get out of here," she called, then began to run. I followed with all the strength that I had left. We didn't slow down until we got home. I was panting and out of breath, and we arrived at our apartment. Papa had also just returned from trying to find bread. We told him what had happened. "My daughters, I wish I had been there to protect you." Papa hugged us close, tears in his eyes. He was deeply shaken by how close we had come to dying. That night, as I tried to sleep, I pondered what had happened. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had answered my prayers. Did that mean He was alive? I guess we'll find out when we start reading chapter 6. But that concludes Face to Face with Jesus, chapter 5. Thank you for joining me here at Let's Talk, and I'll see you next time. Bye.